every other week about interesting topics. And this time, Henry sent a topic that was called "How," or let's see, is life without sex a bad thing or okay at any age? And I'm sorry, I probably already messed that all the way up. And I was like, okay, that's a really interesting topic. I'm very happy to talk about it. I wasn't sure why it was so appealing, and so I'm going to ask you, Henry, why is this topic so appealing to you?
Okay, so I've been watching, or I've seen a lot of videos where the topic is sex, and I noticed though in those videos that they all operate with the presumption that not having sex is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it would be sort of interesting just to bounce that question around a little bit to
Okay.
see whether or not it holds up. Because I mean, as we get into this, you'll see so much of where the conversation goes depends on whether or not you assume that not having sex is a bad thing.
Right.
So I'm just curious, how do you land? Because we've been talking a lot, and I feel like I've come to understand this concept that we've talked about a couple of times of the inner landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been trying to kind of like think like Christine. It's like,
All right.
so in terms of the inner landscape, like what might Christine say? And so I'm just curious as to whether I got it right. So in terms of with regard to the question, um, is
I
not
had to
having
make
sex a bad thing? How
I
does
had to
it how
make
does
you
it relate
go.
to that?
I had to make you go first and say, well, what do you think I'm going to say?
Well, I keep coming back to Christine would probably say, in terms of the inner landscape, it depends on what's healthy for your inner landscape. So,
There you go.
okay, that's what I figured. That's what I figured.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the funny thing about that is like I said, I've watched a lot of videos, and one of the things that I've noticed, or at least an impression that I'm getting from quotes that researchers are getting
Mm-hmm.
from people in their 20s, is that notion of the inner landscape and sort of like nurturing it
Mm-hmm.
seems to be something that is much more common among people in their 20s than earlier generations.
Yeah.
There's one quote that I can think of right offhand where a woman was sort of relaying that she's talked to a lot of people in their 20s about this issue, and so many people will tell her that, well, I just feel like my 20s are a time to really sort of work on my emotional health and well-being,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's easier to do that without the baggage of a relationship that I also have to think about. And so I'm doing that now, and I'm not going to worry about intimate relationships until later. So does
Yeah.
that? So you agree with that? That it does
Well,
seem as though.
I think you're absolutely spot on that more younger people are looking at life in particular phases. And, like when you and I were growing up, the big moral panic was that young people were having sex, like, and somehow that was a problem, especially if they weren't married. Like, how do we get them to stop having sex? It was the teenage pregnancy thing. Like, all of that was like, oh, we need to stop this, this sin out there. And also because and even the generation that precedes us was more like you got married in your early 20s, and so that
Mhm.
whole adolescent period was shorter. And even and now and then for a little while, like, kids were getting reaching maturity younger, and
Mhm.
that's actually the case now, and then reaching adulthood much older. And so you've got this, anywhere from 10 to 20 years from a time that somebody is, physically sexually mature to maybe the time that they get married and have kids. And
Mhm.
so, you don't think about your life in as much of a compressed time, I think, as previous generations. So I think kids now, there's a lot of pressures on them um, to a lot of pressures on them. And so one of the things I think that they are looking at, since they're not jumping straight from school or college to career and family and kids, is what do you do in those years that people used to devote to, their early adulthood, children, and career, that maybe, career's not quite as important now as it had been before, because people expect to have 5 or 6 or 7 different careers as they go through, and kids being more mindful about, well, who am I in this process? If I don't need to jump into these things, and I have my own life and I have my own sense of who I want to be, how do I get to express that in the way that's meaningful for me? Um,
Well, you
that's
said so. Okay, so just now you said a lot of things that are I didn't expect you to say.
okay.
So I got a little bit of the inner
Yay.
Christine,
By the way.
but you can still surprise me. So
All right.
just like you said, there was a period like I mean, for me, I was in high school in the '80s,
Mm-hmm.
and so there were the movies which sort of portrayed teen sex and teen
Uh-huh.
sexuality, and then it was the reality,
Mm-hmm.
which the movies was sort of felt sort of aspirational,
Mm-hmm.
and in another way that like going like sticking with that sort of mindset, in a way, the 17-year-old me would have
Mm-hmm.
interpreted the question, is not having sex a bad thing at any age, to basically mean, is not having fun a bad thing at any age. That
Okay.
that it would have been the same thing for me.
Really? Okay.
I
Okay.
wouldn't have even heard the word sex. I just would have heard the word fun.
Okay.
Um, and so that's kind of like, but then the other thing that was true about that period that sort of is interesting in contrast to what you were saying about, you know, um, people in their 20s having a lot of anxiety today.
Mm-hmm.
And I've met other people who were in high school at around the same time that I was in high school. I did not think about my life beyond the age of 30. I did not think about it because I remember very, very clearly
Mm-hmm.
how the AIDS epidemic, the way it kind of filtered down to my high school world was
Mm-hmm.
it was this disease that you get, nobody knows how you get it,
Mm-hmm.
but it has something to do with sex. And you can catch this disease and you're going to die a horrible death. And
Oof.
so, that was, I
Yes.
don't know how much more anxiety you could possibly get than feeling
Yeah.
that. Plus, the other thing is I lived in New Orleans, Louisiana, which I vaguely remember at around the time it had the worst murder rate in the country, or at least it was
Okay.
constantly competing with other
Mm-hmm.
cities for having the worst murder rate in the country. And so, the reason why I never really thought about my life beyond 30 is because I didn't really feel, I felt like there was a pretty good chance that I wasn't going to live to see beyond 30 anyway. And
Wow.
then on top of that,
Mm-hmm.
there was this feeling that life was, 20 something. Like the whole thing of being young and partying
Mm-hmm.
and creating, either like being a music artist or writing books or making films or whatever it is, that's life. And then if you live beyond that, then I guess you have to deal with whatever that is, which is basically
Adult.
adulthood.
Yeah.
And so that's a very, very different view of it. And again, I have met people who grew up in other parts of the country who said the exact same thing about not really expecting to live or thinking
Mm-hmm.
in terms of living beyond the age of 30. Um, does that, how does that sort of relate to what you were saying in terms of, because I agree with you, there was a period, up until the teenager was invented in the United States, like this
Mm-hmm.
whole idea that you have this period of time where you're transitioning from being a child to an
Yeah.
adult in the safety of like kind of the assumption is a suburban home environment, and so that was kind of a new thing,
Mm-hmm.
uh and so like, and that sort of created this feeling that we have this experimental period where you can make mistakes,
Yeah.
and there's like almost like an infrastructure to help you deal with the consequences of those mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole way of thinking about it, because I did notice in some of these conversations in these videos where they were talking about sex, there is a bit of a structure that I noticed a couple of times where it's a person who is established in the field of talking, You
Mm-hmm.
know, either it's a journalist or something like that,
Uh-huh.
and they're about our age, and so
Uh-huh.
they're pretty well put together, you
Yeah.
know, and that person is talking to a person in their 20s,
Mm-hmm.
and the conversation almost has a, so how is life in Mars kind of feel to it, you know?
I bet,
and
yeah.
and I can't help but think, I was just like, you know, like the questions are sort of like, oh my God, so, you know, people are not having sex at your age and they're not, you know, masturbating. Wow, my word. And I'm just like, I don't know. It just sort of has a kind of this sort of feel to it where it's like you build a residential community with no sidewalks, no parks, and very
Mm-hmm.
small yards. And then you wonder why the kids are not going out and playing. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, we have a society where people don't really do all of the accidental things that we did in the past. Like you
Yeah.
mentioned, our past, it was just kind of, we were just bumbling along.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about like, you know, like the common sort of experiences that people had, so much of it was accidentally meeting this person, accidentally running into
Yeah.
that person, you know, situations where like these kind of tropes about like meeting under the bleachers and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so this sort of, you know, 40 years later or 30 years later, sort of talking to somebody as if we were so much more deliberate in terms of our intimacy is sort of amusing to me in some ways.
Yeah, but we did have a lot. Yeah, we had a lot more opportunity because we were in a lot
That's
more
right.
accidental situations. But I think that you were talking about like this invented time of the teenager where you were allowed to experiment and there was an infrastructure around that. And I think as much as we don't have as much permission for people to make mistakes because we have, video that stays forever.
Oh,
So
yeah, that's
there's
a good point.
that issue.
Yeah.
But I
Oh my
think that
God.
infrastructure of life, of the experimental part of life really extends into the 20s now for a lot of people. Like, um, because that's where your early career, if you have a career, or your early job stuff, or how you're trying to figure out where you belong in society, where you're moving to your first place, whether it's in the town that you grew up in or city you grew up in or somewhere different. Like you're kind of making your first forays out into the world. And so
Hmm.
that time of experimentation, especially because people are getting married later and later, if they get married at all, and having
Hmm.
kids later and later, that experimentation time has extended. And younger people aren't feeling that they're not feeling pressure to have sex as part of that whole like, or at least through the entire experience. Like maybe that might be little seasons of it in different parts of that, but it's part of that experimentation phase, maybe or maybe not, depending on the kid. It is not like, the focus of that experimentation phase, because it used to be when you were expected to get married in your early to mid 20s. The time before that was to experiment sexually to find that person that you are compatible with. um,
Hmm.
and then now that timeline has been extended, so there's not as much pressure to explore that and use that as part of your way to find a partner.
You know that thing about the easy accessibility, like being on camera all the time. That's
Hmm.
the one thing I hadn't. I mean, and what that reminds me of is in one of the conversations, one of the people who was a millennial, not a Zoomer,
Hmm.
um, she said that she feels like she's always performing.
Hmm.
And I was just like, always? And it kind of reminds me of, I remember I was in a community. I mean, I had a job where I had to travel around the county a lot.
Hmm.
And I was in this community and I noticed this one family had like a driveway that was very steep. And there were two kids, a sister and brother, it seemed to me, because the mom was sort of walking backwards down the driveway with her phone,
Hmm.
filming them, and they were in one of those like those like toy cars
Oh
where
yeah. Yeah.
you have a steering wheel and whatnot, and she was filming them, and they had to, they were doing that kid thing of where you're kind of smiling for the camera,
Yeah.
you're playing for the
Yeah.
camera. And when she said that, I thought about that. I was just like, well, yeah, I guess, I mean, other than like holidays, having adults taking photographs of you with a
Yeah.
Polaroid
Uh-huh.
or something like that. The whole idea of being filmed all the time or very, very often throughout your life is sort of alien to me. So I can kind of see what you're saying, how that might really affect a person's psychology, a
Yeah, but
person's inner
even
landscape.
yeah, but even more than just using your phone to or being filmed that way, like everybody has a phone. You never know
That's
when you're
true.
on somebody's camera. We didn't used
Yeah,
to have a surveillance state unless you went into somewhere like a bank where they had
right.
surveillance so that they could track you if you robbed the bank. But now, like, you have to assume that you are always on camera. You are always
Wow.
being surveilled. You're being surveilled digitally and you're being surveilled video. Like, nothing is private anymore. I mean, and the stuff that I'm finding of things that I didn't realize anybody had the information on, like coming up to present to me, I'm like, well, how did you get that? Like, it's just kind of shocking. Like, I'll give you an example. I saw a friend of mine today, and it's her birthday, and she said
Mhm.
her Apple News feed wished her happy birthday. She goes, I have never shared my birthday with Apple. She said, I'm not on social media. I do very little online. Like, I don't know how they got my birthday, but they're wishing me happy birthday in my Apple Newsfeed, and it's freaking me out. And I've
Mm.
had a lot of other situations recently where I'm like, how do you have this information to present this to me in this way? Like, why are you like I had a thought about this, but I didn't
Mhm.
search it. I didn't look for anything. I didn't like nothing. And all of a sudden I'm getting advertising on what I'm thinking about. And I'm like, how is this possible? And so I think the expectation that you are always performing, you are always being watched, is
Mhm.
something that kids have now that I think is one is deeply disturbing.
Mhm.
But also, can you imagine like not having any sense of privacy anymore? Where at least back in the day, if somebody wasn't pointing a camera at you and you weren't in a bank surveillance system, chances are nobody was filming you for
Oh, thank
posterity.
God.
I know.
Thank God. Yeah, no, I mean, I totally see what you're saying. It sort of explains, a lot of the conversations that I've heard, even though nobody mentioned that. Nobody, I guess maybe it's so common that they all assume
I think it's just a
that,
natural, yeah, it's an assumption that you have. You're
yeah,
always
that
on
that of
camera.
course cameras are everywhere, phones are
Yeah.
everywhere, you never know. That's something else. Um, So yeah, no, but I still agree with you though that basically it depends on what's healthy for you, and I know that there's a global population. I mean, people all around countries all around the planet are
Hmm.
basically having uh, people are having fewer kids,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we're talking about different social systems,
Yeah.
different economic systems. It's just something that's happening.
Yeah.
And so I can understand why government officials would be sort of concerned about that, but the problem is it strikes me as the kind of problem that's hard to fix, as like a problem that you try to tackle directly
Yeah.
without somehow like looking at all of the other things in the environment that might be contributing to that issue.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's the way they're going about it is a reactive stance because 40 years
right.
ago it was like, oh my God, we're gonna run out of resources because we're gonna have 10 billion people and we can't feed 10 billion people on the planet. Like, it was like we need to keep the population below a certain amount, or
Hmm.
that was the panic. So we're always
Hmm.
in this kind of back and forth from one extreme to another. And right now, to keep the systems running as they are, they want more kids because without that, you've got an aging population. You don't have as many kids that are working to be able to economically support older people. So I see it more, there's, I see it as a system problem, and
Hmm.
also because we're needing kids to support a system that really doesn't work very well anyway. But also it's a hopefulness barometer that if people are not feeling like they can afford kids, that there's infrastructure for kids, that the world is going to be okay for kids, if that there's kind of not going to be as many kids because people are just not going to make that a priority if they, if they can't afford it, if they are missing, you're not going to have kids before you have a solid job, unless it's an accident, and that happens, but not as often as it used to. Like, I think teen pregnancies and unwanted pregnancies are lower now than they've ever been, because people are much more mindful about that, and that you can avoid that a lot more. And so you don't have the accidental parenthood as much as you used to. So when you can choose that, and you need criteria like a place to live that you can have kids there, enough money to pay for kids because it's very expensive, being able to orient your life around children in terms of childcare and things like that. Like, there's a lot of things that go into having kids, more so than just like all of a sudden you have this child. And so being reactive to this problem without looking at all of those things, as well as, what's depressing. There's a lot of male fertility issues that's are part of this, and that's the microplastics and all this other kind of stuff, the estrogenics in plastics that can cause issues for fertility. There's a lot of things going on, and our reaction to them doesn't really look at the root causes, like you were saying, on a holistic level. Like, how do we really change the system so that children are more welcome, and that we want more of them, and that people can have them, and that people feel supported in having them.
Yeah, I mean I agree with you that this conversation in some ways is or people becoming sour on the future. So in other words, do people, when you this focus on people in their 20s is in a way saying, is it the case that people no longer look forward to the future? And I'm kind of like, well, duh,
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
because like
like,
you were saying, when you didn't expect to live beyond 30, and there's a whole like rising Gen A like they're thinking, well, I'm not going to survive, not because not them personally so much as that humanity is not going to survive. I'm part of humanity, therefore I'm not going to survive either. So I think there is a fatalism, and why would you want to invest your life in having kids if you can just keep yourself alive and have fun and do what you want to do until humanity blows itself up. So yeah, I think there's a certain hopelessness out there that is driving part of this too.
well, that's the other thing is in these conversations that I've watched, it doesn't sound like people in their 20s are having much fun.
No.
And one thing that I kind of occurred to me because I kind of thought about the different social movements in American society
Hmm.
at different periods, not necessarily going all the way back to like the women's suffrage movement, but if you think about the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the free love movement,
Hmm.
and if you think about those movements, it's hard to talk about those movements without talking about music on some level. Like
Yes.
there's often a song or an artist or
Mhm.
a musical movement
Yeah.
or a concert or
A
something like
whole
that.
culture around music, and all of those had a culture around music that, yeah, we
Ex-
don't have now.
well, I was thinking the same thing, and then
Or did you find it?
one of the videos, I forget the guy's first name, but his last name is Khan, and like they kind of quoted him because now you can quote people because people post things
Hmm.
on the internet like through social media. And they quoted one of his posts as basically saying something to the extent of, I uploaded my songs to TikTok, I took
Hmm.
an edible, I went to sleep, and when I woke up, I was famous.
Oh my
Um, and and like these were two people, unlike the other setup that I
God.
told
Uh-huh.
you about, where it's a person in their 50s
Hmm.
basically talking to a person in their 20s. This was a
Right.
conversation between two people in their 20s.
Oh, cool.
Um, and they were both saying how, well, this guy has a very Northeastern sort of vibe to his music that I really relate to. And
Hmm.
the key thing, though, because there are other bands that I've heard of. I think there's a band called Geese that like is popular among
Okay.
people in the 20s and stuff like that. But this particular guy, the thing that they said specifically is that his music speaks to a moment that we're living in. They
Okay.
specifically said that.
Uh-huh.
but I think that that quote of, you know, I uploaded my songs to TikTok, which kind of
Mm-hmm.
almost sounds like he recorded the songs by himself. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know that he did, but it sort of sounds that
Yeah.
way. Then I took an edible, went to sleep, and woke up and I'm famous. So, unlike all the bands that we can think of where, you know, they performed at CBGBs for years,
Mm-hmm.
or they performed at
Yeah.
this, that, or the other thing for years, and gradually built up, you know, this audience, you know, and people would talk about how going to these concerts, you know, affected their lives and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. None of that happened here, you know, and here he is
Yeah.
speaking, he's speaking to a particular kind of isolation that's very common among that generation, in his songs, and
Mm-hmm.
he's reflecting it in the success he's had with this music,
Good.
you know. So
Okay.
it's fascinating. It's like, I wonder what it would take to have something similar to, because like I said, I don't know, I mean, I'm not an historian, so I don't know that this connection between musical movements and,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, music scenes, this connection to that, and all these like mini revolutions, social revolutions,
Yeah.
whether or not that goes all the way back in American history, or whether it kind of starts at a particular point, maybe with, I mean, I have seen sort of, I think I remember seeing a documentary about jazz and
Mm-hmm.
jazz's relationship to, you know, the 20s and the 30s, but
Yeah.
I don't remember that documentary making this as close a connection as documentaries I've seen about like the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and, you know, the free love movement and all that. I mean, those movements, you almost think of them almost as musical movements that
Right.
affected society as opposed to societal movements. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing, like, okay, when I was in graduate school, a friend of mine and I, who didn't want to do a whole ton of work for this semester long project we had, did we did the workers' rights, I guess it'd be workers' rights, not so much movement, but workers' rights throughout the last 100 years through music.
Okay.
And so, and how the music helped to catalyze people, and don't ask me what the songs were, but music catalyzed people throughout the Industrial Revolution, and to make changes with workers' rights. And so I think between that, and it reminded me when you said that, but also the civil rights movement, jazz, some of these other things, the music ended up translating into a body politic that held, certain ideas catalyzed by the music that made change on that level. That was something that people would had in common, whether they listened to it on the radio or something else. Like a lot of people tapped into it, and we'd had this conversation before where there's so like it used to be that you only had like you had AM and FM, and you had
Hmm.
um, three network stations, and you had like the countdown on Sunday about the top whatever songs that happened to be, and
Right.
those were the songs everybody listens to. And you might have like the
Right.
country countdown and the other countdown, like all the rest of the countdown, but or you might have various little countdowns, but they were the music that's playing on the radio, and that's what people listened
Hmm.
to, and everybody had um, at least exposure to. If that was not their favorite music on the radio, you didn't have a choice. You had to listen to it or buy the record and listen to something else.
Right.
So I wonder with this music if it is, because everything is so distributed now, if it's enough to be able to bring a shared experience into a body politic, or a body culture that actually can be cohesive enough to make a change in this particular generation for more of a world that gives them hope.
See, my
um,
answer, my guess is no, because like I said, I was exposed to this guy, and like I said, his last name is Khan. He's from
mhm,
Vermont. Um, and I was exposed to this guy through a conversation that I witnessed on my laptop between one person in their 20s
mhm,
who loved this music, who was in DC, I think,
mhm,
and another person in their 20s, who loves his music, who's currently living in New York. And they were having a conversation
yeah,
virtually. So,
Yeah.
and
Right.
so,
Which is very
and
different.
there might be millions of people their age who love this guy's music, and it's they're moved by it and it's really
Yeah.
speaking to their anxieties and all that kind of stuff. But if they never gather,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
If there's no
if this isn't
Woodstock for these kids,
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and so if that doesn't happen, then it's kind of hard to see how it's going to lead to a particular social revolution.
Yeah. I know it'll be interesting to see how life as we know it now, um, for kids in particular, young people. I mean, sorry, kids. I mean, like 35 and younger. Um, kids I used to babysit. So that to be able to to figure out how to organize politically and how to organize socially and culturally and globally, because that's one thing that is available now for young people as a body culture that was not really available to us when we were growing up. Like you were in your country, and chances are you were really isolated in your region. Like it was whatever was
Right,
going on in your region is
right.
what was has the most important for you. And then we got a
Hmm.
little bit more, national later on, but not so much international. But that right now is something that is highly available if there are ways to organize and catalyze that on a global scale for younger people in helping to create a world that is more hopeful, that they might want to have more sex.
Well,
To get back
actually,
to our
well, yeah.
topic.
To get back to our topic, yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Well, actually, I think the absence of a musical scene that's
Hmm.
specifically, speaking to, these issues. Because if you think about it, I just named a bunch of social issues, anti-war,
Hmm.
civil
Yeah.
rights, and free love. We've got all three going on right now. The United States right now is at war with Iran.
Hmm. Right.
Um, we've got basically a theocracy imposed, in an
Hmm.
attempt to impose a theocracy on the country.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
and we've got like attacks on body autonomy for women,
Hmm.
going
Yeah.
on at the same time, and there isn't any music associated with that at all.
Well, the one that there is the old side is Bruce Springsteen. He's been out there making new music. I mean, not it's not a huge thing, but he's been out there making kind of
The
his
streets of
rebel music.
Minneapolis. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah.
but he's like what, in his 70s or maybe 80s? I don't know how old he is, but
Right, and
you
and
know,
that's I think that's the problem though,
yeah.
because this I think this is a young person's thing. Like one
Oh, it
video
is.
that I saw, they were talking about how in like the anti-war movement was very much on college campuses,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And they're like college campuses are almost silent when it comes to this right now, and I think part of the reason is because there is no music to
There's
bring
no.
people together,
Yeah.
and that's also the reason why it's so hard to gauge whether or not people agree or disagree or are frustrated or angry. It's so hard to
Hmm.
know what's going on in the country
Yeah.
because there isn't any kind of all of our art is basically disseminated through corporate
Hmm.
platforms,
Hmm.
and so as opposed to a bunch of people just kind of get together, they form a group, they start performing, and people start meeting, and
Yeah.
I mean they're not at the point yet where they're selling millions of records.
Yeah.
They're just at the point where a whole bunch of people just love their stuff and they're having a great time.
Yeah.
um, and it seems as though so many of those bands were at that point first, and then
Hmm.
eventually they sold, a whole lot of records and became, extremely wealthy and icons and all that kind of stuff. But at
Yeah.
first, they were just the guys who people went to see, guys and
Hmm.
women in some cases that people went to see.
Yeah.
And we don't have anybody at that phase that I know of. You know what I mean?
No, I mean nothing really. There's, I mean, well, Taylor Swift maybe
Right, but that goes
for
back to
women and girls,
the
right?
corporate
But and
platform, and
it
then
does,
speaking to the moment.
but she is actually, and I just thought of her as somebody who is a musical icon at this point. I don't really follow her,
Yeah.
so I have no idea, but that really speaks to women and girls and even guys and men because she has quite a following across both.
Well, there's a name for it, Swifties. I mean, there's a name
Yeah, all
for it.
the
So to your
Swifties.
point, yeah, to your
And
point.
I don't really know. I don't know if she's catalyzing that into more social or political things. But she's one, and she's the only one I can think of that has that current icon kind of status. But maybe there's other people that I'm sure there are other people that I have no idea. But there is somebody, younger person in my life who was trying to get tickets to Ticketmaster because what a mess that is, for a concert for somebody who I don't know. So I can't tell you who he is. Popular singer though, and ended up having to buy the tickets. Ended up buying them actually for performing in London. So, which actually was less expensive than buying them like in New York City or buying them somewhere she'd have to travel in the US. So, and you couldn't
Wow.
get it was nowhere close by. So it was cheaper for her and her friends to fly to London, which hopefully will work out because it's in a couple months, to see this person than to be able to travel and do that in the US. But it was somebody with enough following that you couldn't get tickets and people were really wanting to see this person in person. So maybe there's more of a music scene than we think, and it's just not the same kind of distribution. Like they're on things like Spotify and on the corporate channels, but it's not like they're out signing album covers on the street or anything like that.
Well,
Or
yeah, I mean,
small.
kind of like you're saying, like connecting it to the topic that we're having now in terms of like the things that would make people decide, or
Mm-hmm.
not even so much decide, create the opportunity
Yeah.
for people to be intimate. I mean, getting together just seems to be the thing that's missing. I mean, I'm curious, did you watch the Super Bowl this year?
No, like you. I live on the East Coast, and for me, that's just too late. And I didn't really
Oh,
care about
okay.
either of the teams, and
Right, right,
so no,
right.
I didn't. I
I'm
didn't
I'm
watch it.
thinking of the halftime show because in
Oh,
terms of
yeah,
things speaking to the moment, it was political
it
for
was.
sure.
Yeah.
It was definitely political. And again, it to me, here you have a corporate platform,
Mm-hmm.
basically, or a corporate control platform,
Yeah.
and it's extreme. I mean, the money that went behind all of the people he had
Yeah.
on the field with him, and and just the production level was extremely high for
Yes.
this performance. But at the same time, I didn't watch it either because it was too late and I wasn't into either team either. But at the same time, I saw all of these clips of it,
Yeah. I saw the
and I
clips of the
also saw
halftime show.
clips of, or did you see the clips of people talking about, well, I cried because it was so moving
Yeah, I mean, I
and
had
stuff like
people,
that?
lots of people who sent me the YouTube link of the halftime show and said, "You have to watch this." And then
Mm,
the link of the person who was explaining the halftime show so that you can understand this, just in case all of the political things didn't make sense to you.
right.
And it was very political. It was very well done. I hadn't heard of him before the whole halftime show, kerfuffle,
Yeah.
and before he did that, but apparently quite political and quite big. But still, there does seem to be something lacking in terms of music as a political movement and
Hmm.
music in terms of bringing people together.
Right.
Because part of what music used to be, I mean, it was the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was all the vices at one time that you, you turned into, and
Hmm.
you danced and inhibitions were shed, and people were able to be um, more social and more intimate in those musical settings than they might be in other settings. And now there's a lot more safety is a big thing, which is not a bad thing, but
Right.
it does mean that we don't put ourselves into situations that are as risky in many ways, including socially risky and the risk of meeting somebody new.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of like I've seen, because I believe Singapore had a pretty aggressive program where they tried to encourage people to have, kids,
Yeah, a lot of people
and
have.
South Korea has an interesting kind of thing because on the one hand, I've seen videos where the whole theme of the video is it's like we don't need these guys kind of thing, and you have women sort of
Uh-huh.
walking hand in hand like we don't need these
Right.
guys. They were
Yeah.
paying, they're a burden. Whereas on the other hand, you have like the South Korean government doing all these things, investing money and trying to
Yeah.
encouraging people to get married and have kids.
Yeah.
Um, and I really do think that it's a hard problem to look at and then address head on. You sort of have
Hmm.
to do a shot sort of
Yes.
thing. Like you were saying, kind of like with people in their 20s having sex, it's like, because like you're pointing out, in the past, it was sort of a, you get people to, you bring people together and then stuff that sort of happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and that
Especially if you
seems to
add
be
like alcohol or drugs, like all those
right,
things that
exactly.
are social lubricants and that it reduce inhibitions. Like, that was the formula.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I mean, and it's not just, like you said, vice-ridden sort of environments. There are a
No.
lot of people who met their spouses at work and,
Yeah, a
you know,
church and different
yeah,
things.
at
Yeah.
church,
Yeah.
exactly, or people who met like people in college,
Hmm.
and stuff like that, or met someone through a friend that they're really close to in college,
Hmm.
stuff like that. And so I think it's really the breakdown of all of those opportunities
Yeah.
to get together that's much more related to the issue of um, procreation and having kids and
Yeah. Well, and to
getting
speak to
married. And,
to bring it back to the topic then too, is that's broken down not just for coupling, but across all of our social
right,
interactions and
right.
connections. So the problem, quote unquote, which I don't, again, it depends on the person and the situation and all of that, whether or not
Hmm.
having sex is a problem for you. But the
Hmm.
problem society wide about not having sex is really about not finding connection.
Right,
And
exactly,
that
exactly.
is endemic to the world right now, and to the country, and even interestingly, it's much less of a problem for older people because we all grew up in situations where we had to connect with people in order to just
Hmm.
get through life. But even among older people, like there's a lot more loneliness for
Hmm.
people that's not something that a skill that they've developed or something that's natural to them, or they don't live in a situation in which they see people very often, uh,
Hmm.
whether they're homebound or something like that. So it is bigger than just sex, and we always do kind of funnel it down to the one problem that we can talk about. But the problem of not having connection in the world right now, I think, is one of the major drivers of hopelessness.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. Um, and I'm just wondering, I mean, because we have the No Kings protests that
Hmm.
happen, every couple of months and
Yeah.
so on. But I'm just wondering, it feels like there really needs to be something else, like
Hmm.
something is missing.
There is. It does
Um,
like that.
yeah, and I mean, maybe, the oil shock, might cause people to travel less, maybe spend more time in their communities this
Yeah.
year, because like your friend, you're right to be concerned about whether or not she's going to be able to get to that concert
Or
because
get
a lot
back.
of, or get back, yeah, because a lot of flights have already been
Yeah.
canceled. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of friends who are heading to Europe this summer, and they're getting messages about, well, you might be able to get here because the U.S. has more jet fuel than we do, but you may not be able to get back, so you might want to
Okay.
rethink your ticket. Um,
We
but
can you can fuel the plane there, but we
yeah,
may not be able to fuel it here.
they may well be landing in Berlin and stay. All the planes are going to stay in Berlin. Um,
Damn.
but I think one of the things, like, is the music. Because you think about the civil rights marches and the anti-war marches and stuff compared to like the No Kings, and they always included music.
Right.
Whether you were marching and singing or you marched to a place where there was a band that was playing that kind of spoke what you were marching for, like music was integral to all of that. And I
Exactly.
don't think the No Kings they have chants, but I don't think they have music.
Well, they do have music, but I think it kind of goes to, and no shade on the boss and what he's doing. I think
Oh
what he's
no,
doing
but
is great, but the problem
yeah.
is sort of the same problem throughout our society. It's like,
Hmm.
having so many politicians in their 80s and
Yeah.
having,
Yeah.
the artists that have already kind of done this at least once
Yeah.
in their career, and having that, having to always go back to that. It's like, kind of like the thing with movies. Can't you make another movie besides Star Wars? I know we've got to have another.
No, that is
Come
true.
on.
Yeah, and he is the old style one, and he's actually doing something that's getting some traction. But that it does seem like there is that missing piece that maybe somebody could position themselves into new artists and things. I don't know. It'd be interesting if there were some songs that came out that became the voice of these kinds of movements, so that you know because one of the things that music does is it gives you a template for how to talk about something and how to feel about something. And
Yeah.
even if you're not 100% aligned with it, like you can bring your vibes to that music, and that music can speak for you as well. And so maybe there's an opportunity for some musicians to try to speak to that and position to that. And it's a little more dangerous now because you speak to politics and nasty things can happen to you these days.
Well,
But
that's true, but
this,
the thing is, it seems as though, because I watched a documentary, a really good documentary from the PBS NewsHour, and the title's a little misleading because it's like it starts off funk music,
mm-hmm,
and the Black Liberation Movement is kind of the end of the title,
mm-hmm,
and so I just sort of expected them to talk about, James Brown and George
yeah,
Clinton. But I mean, as I really got into it, it's like, well, wait a second. No, this is a really good analysis of, I mean, so many of the songs, I'd forgotten how well they spoke to different moments.
mm-hmm,
And they're not necessarily obviously political to people who are not going through whatever it is,
yeah,
whatever the situation is, And so, I mean, I see what you're saying about if you kind of announce this is a part of the resistance to the administration, then yeah, you're drawing attention to yourself.
yeah,
you know Whereas if you just get out there and start performing,
mm-hmm,
and people gather in the midst of doing that, that's when sort of like people might come up with, because I think there was one moment where they talked about, James Brown was on stage and he just did something,
mm-hmm,
and I mean it just happened on stage, and that kind of
yeah,
became a big thing that he continued to do after that. And the same thing with George Clinton, because I didn't even know that George Clinton was trying to do the. He talked about how like Motown was the thing, and
mm-hmm,
so people dressed a certain way, they had certain hairstyles, and
right,
one
yeah,
day
yeah,
he did that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And on Friday, he went in the bathroom, washed all that stuff out of his hair, put on a diaper, went out and performed.
oh
It's
my
like-
god, all right,
and that became his thing. And
mm-hmm,
and it's funny because all I know is the image that came after. I'd never
mm-hmm,
seen the prior. I never saw
okay,
like the really put together,
mm-hmm,
All I saw was like the crazy, I'm going to outer space, George. That's
yeah,
the only George Clinton I knew.
huh, okay, interesting. But
So
yeah, but all they do have some. I don't know. There is still something missing. I think some of it's the live music, some of it's the shared experience with the radio and stuff, or maybe it is that we're all so glued to screens that
yeah,
getting out and connecting on that level with people in situations in which you have a shared value system and a shared thing that you're hoping for. Um,
hmm
that is something that could be the missing piece there, which
that's
would
why I
make
say
total
unfortunately.
sense.
That's why I say unfortunately, not being able to go anywhere might be the thing
I know, and I don't know how
that
you
causes
fix
it.
that because we've been out of COVID now for 4 years just about,
Yeah.
and the sting of it and the isolation of it has remained.
Well, no,
Uh,
when I say not be able to go anywhere, I mean like not being able to afford gas.
oh, that too, yes, there's
That's what I
that.
mean. So
But there's
instead of
also the assumption, like growing up and even before COVID, people kind of hungered to be around other people.
true,
And then COVID came along and we kind of got like, oh, we're all keeping our social distance now. And a lot of people never really went back to
Yes,
that
I
meeting
haven't.
other people except for,
That's true.
digitally.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me during COVID, because I remember watching these videos of like these grown men and women
Hmm.
sort of just almost losing their mind in front of a crowd of people when it comes to vaccines. It's like, why do I have to take this and explain
Right.
to me what's in it and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I thought about it and I was just like, I've only really chosen to be vaccinated once in my life, and that
Hmm.
was when I went to do a study abroad class in Brazil.
Hmm.
And the study abroad program recommended is like, well, when you travel to other countries, they might have immunities that you don't have.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
good idea to get vaccinated before you go there. But other than that, I didn't choose to be vaccinated from measles, mumps, rubella. It's
He's a little
like
young to do that. Yeah.
you had to get vaccinated. And in fact, our parents didn't even really choose it either. They wanted us to go to school.
Right.
So it was something we had to do. And I guess where that relates to what you're saying about like after once distancing had been sort of encouraged, people just kept doing it even after they didn't have to. It sort of makes me
Yeah.
think that just like vaccines, there are some things that people will not choose to do, even though it might actually be good for them.
Hmm.
Like if you give them the choice, as opposed to if you want to go to school, your child's going to have to get vaccinated. This is just part of what happens
Right.
before
Right.
your child goes to school.
Yeah.
You know, and so I mean, because going to what you were saying, we used to have to go places for everything. Like I
Hmm.
remember going to an office to pay my bills.
Oh, yeah.
You don't even
Hmm.
have to do that anymore.
Mm-mm.
You don't have to go to the store to buy groceries. You can
Yep.
order it from, there's so many things that we
You can
don't
never
actually
leave your
have to
house.
do anymore.
Yeah. You can
Don't
have
ever
it.
have to leave your house.
You can have a
Exactly.
thing with your doctor. Like you don't have to go to the doctor unless you're,
Yeah.
getting chemo or something. But yeah, there's a
Right.
lot of things that, and in some ways, many of those things are very nice. But if you
Yeah,
use
that's true.
them,
It's convenience. Yeah.
yeah, if you use them in a way that keeps you isolated, like that's a problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And I think that, the accidents, the unexpected things that would happen that have happened throughout our lives,
Yeah.
because we just happen to be a particular place, you run into a particular person or whatever,
Hmm.
or even you might just witness something. You may not ever see those people again, but that sort of stays with you. It made you
Yeah.
laugh or smile or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think part of the problem, I think you mentioned this earlier, is that we just don't have these opportunities
Yeah.
to experience these things anymore. And something needs to happen that creates those opportunities for people again.
Well, they're talking about how many bots are taking over the internet. So, it's anywhere from like 50 to 75% bot interactions now and all these things. So maybe it'll just break itself and we'll have to go out and talk to each other again and figure out how that works.
Wouldn't that be funny? That sounds like a pretty good movie where it's like the internet breaks down and people walk outside and it's just like, what is
Wow.
yours down too? It's like,
Yeah.
what happened? What do you think happened?
I know, I know. Well, and it's not because we were after Helene, like we didn't have internet for, I don't know, we didn't have power for a week, and we didn't have internet for about 2.5 weeks.
Hmm.
I mean, had some people had some little satellite things you could bounce off of, and everybody got like free data, but it was so taxed you could barely use it on your phone. So you're able to do little things here and there, but like people who hadn't paid bills, I'm like, why are you not on auto pay? But I remember people, well, there's no gas because you can't, and then there's trees down everywhere. And people are like,
Hmm.
oh my God, I've got to drive halfway across town to pay my bill. Auto pay one. But also when the internet, like, and I've been thinking about that because I'm like, yeah, what if the internet did break down? Like a lot of my stuff is virtual and not like bills and how would you pay it? How do you know what your bank balance is? How do you, all this kind of stuff that, normally because everything's delivered by email and all this stuff. So anyway, that's away from our sex topic, but it would not be a bad thing. I do think it would be an interesting turn of events if we could still have the things like, online banking and some of the stuff that would be really a hassle if there was no more online stuff. But we didn't, we were forced in one way or another to interact with each other more and have those accidental moments more than just at work or at school or things like that where it's organized. But so to have to really actually go out and take a risk and talk with somebody and have an interaction that's not doesn't have a predetermined context or outcome.
Yeah, I think the way to do it is to create opportunities where people are encouraged to do something for one reason, and it's in mass. And so, because if like I said, I mean, people would meet going to college. They didn't
Mhm.
go to college necessarily to meet this person.
Right.
I mean, ostensibly you're going to be educated, right? You're going to
Mhm.
school, or you get a job in another city or something like that, or just going to the grocery store. You're
Yeah,
going to buy groceries. You're not actually going to meet people, but while you're there,
you
that's
do.
what happens.
Yeah.
Um, and if you have any kind of stability in terms of the employment, because in a lot of places, I
Hmm.
notice, I mean, especially traveling around the country and then living in places for like a couple of weeks, some places have way higher turnover than others.
Hmm.
Where like you might meet somebody who works there this week, but they may not be there 2 weeks from now
Yeah.
because like
Yep. Yep.
either the manager is horrible or like the pay is just so low that people
Yeah.
really are just doing it because they absolutely have to and
Yeah. So they
everybody's looking for
find
something
something else.
better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, there's just you need that stability. But basically, my point is if you create reasons for people to go places,
Hmm.
everybody has to be there. Then while they're there, they're interacting with each other.
Yeah.
So
Well, there's this movement among, I'm not sure which age group this is, about going analog again,
yes,
about getting online. And so,
yeah.
but what I'm wondering is if they are also at the same time, as they're getting off devices and oh my God, how lovely that is. But are they building in some of these other things these social things that people had been using online avenues for? So are they just getting offline and then hanging around by themselves? Are they getting offline and finding ways to connect with other people? Uh,
Well, the video I saw with that, what they showed, and I don't know, I mean, this could have been stock footage to make the
mhm.
point, but in discuss, like they mentioned, well, you have more people in their 20s who are buying, records as opposed to digital stuff, and they
Right.
showed people shopping, browsing
Hmm.
in a record store,
Right.
and then they said, have more people reading actual printed books as
Yeah.
opposed to, digital books, and they show people in a library,
Yeah. But
you know.
are the music people like having a house party with the music? Are the
Well,
book
right, yeah,
readers
yeah.
going to a book club so that they can talk with people? Or is it like these isolated things that people are doing in an analog way, but it's not really connecting people, in ways that the internet had been connecting people? So is the social, is analog social coming back, or is it just analog,
Hmm.
music and books and things like that?
Hmm.
Because that's one of the things that there's just not as many avenues for that as there used to be. But I'm hoping at some point that there might be, um, because we need it.
Well, I think it's 3:59. That's a good place to end it.
All right. Well, sounds good to me.
Okay, well, like we say every 2 weeks, we
Hmm.
have this discussion on Fridays at 3 o'clock every 2 weeks. So we hope people join us 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.